the 1858 Plantation portrait looks peaceful until experts discovered what the enslaved girl was hiding in her hands. The photograph arrived at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture on a cold morning in February 2024. It came as part of an estate donation from a family in Connecticut. Dr. Jennifer Williams, a curator who specializes in antebellum photography, carefully took the daguerreotype out of its protective case. The image showed a white family posed on the veranda of a large plantation house. A man and woman sat in ornate chairs, with 3 children arranged around them, all dressed in their best clothes. The year 1858 was written on the brass plate below the picture. Behind the family, standing in careful order, were 6 enslaved people. This was not unusual. Many plantation owners included enslaved workers in formal portraits to show off their wealth and property. What caught Jennifer's attention was how clear the image was. Daguerreotypes from this time were often sharp and captured fine details that later photo methods missed. She placed the portrait under high-resolution scanning equipment that the museum used to preserve and study old photographs. As the digital image came up on her screen, Jennifer started her usual examination. She noted clothing styles, building details, and anything that might help date and explain the picture more clearly. Then she zoomed in on the faces of the enslaved people in the background. There were 3 women, 2 men, and a girl who looked no more than 16. They all held the carefully neutral expressions common in such photograph submissions shown for the camera, with dignity kept firm beneath it. But the girl's hands drew Jennifer's eye. Her arms hung at her sides, fingers loosely clasped at her waist. Something about the pose seemed intentional and controlled. Jennifer increased the magnification and focused on the girl's hands. Her breath caught. Between the girl's fingers, barely visible in the folds of her worn dress, was something small and pale. At this resolution, Jennifer could see it was a piece of fabric, a tiny square about 2 inches on each side, clutched secretly in the girl's palm. Jennifer had studied hundreds of plantation photographs but had never seen anything like this. Enslaved people in these portraits were positioned by the photographers to show rule and obedience. They were not supposed to hold anything or have items of their own. Every detail was controlled by the enslavers. Yet this girl had managed to hide something in her hands during the long exposure, keeping it concealed from the photographer and the family who owned her. Jennifer leaned closer to her screen, her heart beating fast. The fabric appeared to have markings on it, lines, possibly symbols. The resolution was good, but not enough to see the details clearly. She needed better tools and expert analysis. More importantly, she needed to learn who this girl was, what she was holding, and why she had taken such a risk to hide it in a photograph that would record her defiance. Jennifer contacted Dr. Marcus Chen, a forensic imaging specialist at MIT who had created advanced methods for historical photographs. Within 2 days, Marcus arrived at the museum with portable equipment that could examine the daguerreotype at microscopic levels. Daguerreotypes are great for this kind of work, Marcus explained as he set up his tools. They are formed on silver-coated copper plates. The detail they capture is amazing, often better than what the eye could see back then. He placed the plate under a special microscope linked to computer imaging software. If there's anything written or drawn on that fabric, we should be able to see it. Jennifer watched the monitor as Marcus adjusted lights and digital filters. The girl's hands appeared enlarged many times. The piece of fabric became clearer, definitely cloth, possibly cotton or linen, folded several times to make it small. "There," Marcus said, pointing. "Do you see those marks?" Jennifer leaned in. On the visible part of the fabric were thin, dark lines drawn with purpose. As Marcus improved the contrast and sharpness, the lines turned into clear shapes. They were not random marks, but deliberate drawings. "It's a map," Jennifer whispered. Marcus nodded slowly and adjusted sections on the screen. "Not just any map. Look at these symbols." He pointed to small marks along the line stars and what looked like rivers or roads. Jennifer felt a chill. She had studied Underground Railroad history in depth. The maps used by those seeking freedom were often coded with natural landmarks and signs that meant nothing to enslavers but everything to those trying to escape north. Can you make out any text?" she asked. Marcus zoomed further and used different light wavelengths to reveal hidden details. Faint letters appeared along one edge, so small they were hard to read even at this size. "Mississippi." Marcus reads slowly. "This is a map of escape routes from Mississippi." Jennifer's mind raced. The plantation house in the photo had features typical of the Deep South. If this was Mississippi in 1858, the girl was holding proof of one of the most dangerous acts possible, not just planning her own escape, but keeping information that could help others flee. "Can you show the full image again?" Jennifer asked. "I want to see her face." Marcus switched views. Jennifer studied the girl's neutral, obedient expression. But now, knowing what she held, Jennifer saw something else in those eyes, not just submission, but careful thought. The girl had known exactly what she was doing and had chosen this moment to save evidence of resistance. How long would the exposure have taken for a sharp outdoor daguerreotype like this? Jennifer asked. "Probably 3 to 5 minutes, Marcus replied. She would have had to stay perfectly still the whole time, keeping the map hidden while the image was. Made 3 to 5 minutes of complete stillness, acting compliant while holding something that could cost her life. The courage needed was immense. Jennifer spent the next week in archives, looking for details about the daguerreotype's origin. The Connecticut family had received the portrait from an ancestor who married into a Southern family in the 1870s after the Civil War. Their records were limited but included a handwritten note saying the image showed Thornhill Place, Natchez District, Mississippi, 1858. Jennifer returned from Mississippi with copies of the journals. Sarah had been mentioned several times in the months before and after the daguerreotype was made. The notes described her as a quiet teenage girl with delicate health who did sewing work for Margaret Thornhill. But other entries raised concerns. In August 1858, 3 months after the photo, Thornhill wrote, "2 slaves missing from the quarters, Daniel and Ruth. Overseer thinks they fled north. Need more watchfulness." In September. No news of runaways. $50 reward posted, but no information. Suspect help from outside. Will question house servants. Jennifer sat with Angela in a coffee shop sharing tea. He journal copies and enhanced map images. 2 people escaped in August 1858, Jennifer said. 3 months after this photograph and Thornhill suspected inside help. Angela examined the dates. If Sarah was involved, she faced huge danger once the investigation began. "Look at this," Jennifer said, pointing to an October entry. Overseer reports unusual talk among house servants. Margaret's seamstress has been seen speaking with field hands despite orders to stay separate. "We will watch her more closely." "He was watching her," Angela said softly. "He suspected something." A later entry from 2 weeks after confirmed it. Margaret noticed her seamstress carries a small book, claims it holds sewing patterns. The girl is smart, maybe too smart. Have told Overseer to monitor her. Jennifer felt her chest tighten. Sarah had been carrying something, a book or record. Was it linked to the map? Had she been noting routes and safe places? "There's more," Jennifer continued. In November 1858, received information from informant about seamstress Sarah. Evidence suggests she aided runaways. Planned to question her thoroughly, but the girl disappeared overnight. Suspect she was warned. Investigating who among the house servants alerted her. Angela leaned back. Sarah disappeared. She escaped before Thornhill could question her. Or she was sold, Jennifer added. Or worse. We don't know, but we know she was suspected of helping Daniel and Ruth escape. Jennifer and Angela widened their search. They reached out to Dr. Raymond Foster, a historian at the University of Southern Mississippi who had researched underground railroad networks in the Deep South for decades. "Mississippi was one of the hardest places to escape from," Raymond explained. "You were far from free states and moved through heavily guarded land, but people still tried, and some succeeded with organized help." "Could a 16-year-old enslaved girl have been part of that network?" Jennifer asked. "Yes," Raymond said. "Young people, especially house servants, were often effective because enslavers underestimated them. They heard conversations, saw letters, and learned patrol patterns while seeming completely obedient. The map showed routes northeast toward Tennessee and northwest to Mississippi River crossings. This detail suggests Sarah did not make it alone, Raymond said. This knowledge came from many sources over time. She was part of a network, and this map was important enough to risk keeping. They spent hours matching the tiny map to historical geography. Jennifer thought about Daniel and Ruth, who escaped in August 1858. This map had likely helped them. She was probably a courier, Raymond said, passing information between those planning to leave. Angela focused on tracing Sarah after her November 1858 disappearance. After many days, she found a promising marriage record from 1866 in Natchez. A woman named Sarah married a man named Daniel. Both were formerly enslaved, and Daniel had served in the Union Army. The note said the bride and groom had reunited after a long separation, having fled bondage at different times. I think I found her, Angela told Jennifer. They were separated when they escaped but found each other again after the war. It matched the timeline. If Sarah helped Daniel and Ruth escape in 1858, then fled herself in November, they would have been apart for 8 years. Raymond found a letter from an Ohio Quaker group in 1859 describing help given to a young woman of about 17 who called herself Sarah. She arrived in poor condition, on after traveling through Kentucky, and had valuable knowledge of routes. She had aided others, which made her own escape necessary. The details fit Sarah perfectly. Angela found more traces. A Detroit church record from 1860 of a young seamstress named Sarah, and a Canadian census from 1861 listing a black woman around age 19 living near Toronto. Sarah had reached Canada for safety under the Fugitive Slave Act. But by 1865, Freedmen's Bureau records showed her traveling from Detroit back to Mississippi, marked as seeking family. She came back after emancipation, Angela said. She had lived safely in Canada but returned to look for the people she left behind, especially Daniel. To confirm the connection, Angela traced the family line. Sarah and Daniel stayed in Natchez, had 4 children, and worked as a carpenter and dressmaker. They helped build schools during Reconstruction. The line led to Grace Patterson, age 70, living in Jackson, Sarah, and Daniel's great-great-granddaughter. When Jennifer explained the research, Grace said immediately, "You need to come see the quilt." In Grace's living room, surrounded by family photos, Grace brought out a carefully kept quilt. "Tea was made by my great-great-grandmother Sarah," she explained. "It's been passed down through the women in our family. My grandmother said it held secrets." As Grace unfolded it, Jennifer gasped. Embroidered in one corner in tiny, neat stitches was a map, the same map Sarah had hidden in her hands in the 1858 daguerreotype. She recreated it, Jennifer said softly. After she escaped and after the war, she stitched the map into this quilt to keep it safe. Grace nodded. Grandmother said it was a freedom map. Sarah helped people escape slavery and carried information that saved lives. She wanted us to remember. She told her daughters that helping others find their way was the bravest thing she ever did. The quilt had names embroidered along the border: Daniel, Ruth, James, Elizabeth, Samuel. These are people the map helped save, Angela said. Grace confirmed Sarah had helped at least 12 people escape before she had to run herself. Ruth was Daniel's sister. Sarah and Daniel had hoped to marry one day, but after the escape and investigation, Sarah had to flee too. They were apart for 8 years. Daniel joined the Union Army and Sarah reached Canada before returning. Grack knee showed the original tiny map Sarah had carried, still preserved after 160 years. She hid it in her hair, Grace explained. Wrapped in her head covering like many enslaved women did. She also shared a small notebook full of sewing notes that actually contained coded escape instructions hidden among measurements. Sarah and Daniel lived together for 42 years until his death. Sarah passed away in 1915 at age 73. She never spoke publicly about her Underground Railroad work, but told the stories to her daughters so they would be remembered. The Smithsonian created a major exhibition around Sarah's story and the wider network of resistance. The daguerreotype was shown with enhanced images of the hidden map. Next to it were the original map, the quilt, and the coded notebook. A special wall honored others in the network, including Martha, a kitchen worker who warned Sarah and was later sold away as punishment, but eventually reunited with her own children. The exhibition drew large crowds and sparked new research. Hundreds of families shared stories and artifacts, revealing a much larger pattern of organized resistance by enslaved people. Jennifer wrote a book about it, and The Saint. Eerie changed how many people understood slavery not only as oppression, but as a system that faced constant challenge from those inside it. Grace and Sarah's descendants held family reunions and created new quilts to pass the story forward. Today, visitors still stand before the 1858 portrait, seeing not just a peaceful scene but a quiet act of courage that helped lead people to freedom and preserve truth across generations. Even in the hardest times, people resist, help one another, and find ways to fight for liberty sometimes, hiding the proof in places no one expects. Like hands that look empty but hold a map to a better future.